Welcome back. We are very privileged to be joined today by Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, professor, and also the founder of DiEM25, that is Democracy in Europe movement. So thank you for coming on. I've been looking forward to speak with you regarding Trump's new peace board, which many people interpret as an effort to push aside and replace the United Nations and international law itself. Well, you have referred to Trump's peace board as an abomination. Now, I was wondering, why do you see this being so dangerous?
I don't just see it as being dangerous. I think that historians of the future will remember the 17th of November, 2025, when Resolution 2803 of the Security Council approved the Board of Peace and Donald Trump as its owner and chair. That approval by the Security Council, I do believe, is going to go down in history as the end of the United Nations. Essentially, the United Nations abolished itself through that resolution. Now, at the time, you will recall that only two countries abstained in the Security Council. It was China and Russia. I have to say that I was mad that they did, but then again, when I heard their arguments, I thought, unfortunately, they may have a point. But the reason why I'm saying that it abolishes the United Nations, Glenn, is because, come to think of it, essentially, what it does is it is a recognition of the end of history, not in Francis Fukuyama's terms, but in terms of the end of history regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You will recall, and I'm sure our audience knows this very well, that the United Nations Security Council has been making every few months, every year, all the time, some efforts to keep on the rails the peace process, or whatever is left of the peace process, between the two sides, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And the United Nations has this tactic, or let's say it's an institutional memory, not tactic, institutional memory, whereby, every resolution follows the previous resolutions. So, if you follow the history of the engagement of the United Nations with the issue of Palestine, you'll find that there is a continuity. It begins with the recognition of two parallel states, Israel and a Palestinian state. One of them was inaugurated, the other one never was. And then it moves on to resolutions after every battle was fought, every defeat of the Palestinian people. What the 17th of November resolution accepting the Board of Peace as the next step in this process, what it does, it annuls this whole history. Essentially, it was a remarkable success by Donald Trump to step in and salvage the bacon of Benjamin Netanyahu, because you will recall that before that resolution, before the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, because there is no ceasefire, Palestinians are being killed and starved to death on a daily basis as we speak. What that so-called ceasefire and the resolution by the Security Council did was essentially to save Netanyahu from a major propaganda defeat. You will remember that four major countries, middle powers, Canada, Australia, Britain, and France, recognized the state of Palestine. It was a very hypocritical recognition, because they never, if they really wanted to do something about bringing about the Palestinian state, which they recognized so hypocritically, they would have stopped arming Israel, they would have embargoed Israel, they would have done all the things that the BDS movement says that they should be doing, but they never did that. But nevertheless, it was still a major defeat for Netanyahu. Trump steps in, imposes that ceasefire, brings about the notion of a Board of Peace, which will be totally outside international law, totally outside the history of the Palestinian occupied lands as occupied lands, and effectively resets the clock as if we're going back to 1945 or 1948, or maybe even before that. That saved Netanyahu because, let's face it, the International Court of Justice in June of 2024 had clearly stipulated that Israel was in breach of international law, ordered Israel to withdraw from East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. You had international condemnation of the genocide. You had the International Criminal Court indicting Netanyahu and his former defense minister as war criminals. And with that resolution, the United Nations Security Council effectively annulled all that. And we go back to a situation, Glenn, and this is the main point I want to make, whereby Gaza doesn't belong to the Palestinians anymore. There are no Palestinians in the resolution. They don't exist. It is as if it is terra nullius, an empty land. And I'm mentioning that term very poignantly because terra nullius was the legalistic term that European colonial powers used back in, a century ago, or more than 2 centuries ago, in order to justify colonizing various lands around the world, from Australia, New Zealand, Kenya, South Africa, and so on. The first thing that the European colonizers did was to say that land has no people and no history, no owners. It's outside international law. It's like, going to an asteroid between Jupiter and, I don't know, some other planet. Right? And, the fact that the United Nations recognize that and recognize that there is going to be a corporation, a private company, that is going to have as a lifelong chairman a man, not a president, not a representative of the people, but a man called Donald J. Trump. And that he has no obligation whatsoever. He's not answerable to the board. He's not answerable to the United Nations. He's not answerable even to the Congress of the United States of America. And he simply has to give a report every 6 months to the United Nations, if he wants to. It's not even a report that has to be approved of or anything like that. So essentially, the United Nations annulled itself when it approved of that resolution on the 17th of November, 2025. And I have to, and this is how I'm going to complete my long answer. Apologies for taking so long, but I'm livid about all this. Why did the French and the British, who had supposedly recognized the state of Palestine, including Gaza, only a few weeks before, why did they accept that? Well, they accepted that because for them, this was something that concerned brown people in the Middle East. It didn't concern them. Now they know better. They know that the Board of Peace is not just about Palestine. It's not about Gaza. And now the Board of Peace is about everything. And, you have all these Bond villains that Trump has amassed, has surrounded himself with. And he's talking about Greenland. Tomorrow he's going to talk about Canada. And, now the chickens are coming home to roost, metaphorically speaking. And you have people like, Mark Carney, the liberal premier of Canada, Prime Minister of Canada, coming out with a very interesting speech in Davos recently, saying, "Oh my goodness, this is the end of the world as we knew it." Well, you idiots, you brought this about by approving a United Nations resolution which effectively annuls the United Nations and annuls international law and annuls your right to exist.
Well, I remember when Trump first proposed to ethnically cleanse the entire population of Gaza, have the United States take over the region and create this Riviera of the Middle East. To be honest, at the time, I interpreted it as an effort to shake up the status quo and create some room for maneuver. But I thought it was going to be a bit limited as well. But this, as you said, this is something a lot bigger. This is, again, and I think I didn't take it literally. I thought, because what he says and what he does is two very different things. But I think, we opened up Pandora's box with this one. So, but another aspect of this whole thing is the whole what you already alluded to, which is that this is a private corporation, and even the members have to pay in $1 billion. How do you make sense of this? privatization of international law, or merging all this commercial interest with coercion and essentially law, because this is well, it's not unprecedented, but it is well, where is this going?
You know what surprises me, Glenn? What surprises me is that people are surprised. Because, I have always followed a very simple strategy, a very simple method of thinking. I take seriously what villains say. So, Donald Trump, maybe he's not the most cogent and eloquent of theorists in the history of the universe, but he's got people around him who are. If you ever listen to Peter Thiel speak, to various tech lords that he has amassed around him, they have a very clear view of the future. Their future is the replacement of the state by corporations. They talk about free cities, and they don't mean it in terms of freedom of the citizens. They mean it in terms of cities that belong to corporations, where the board, the members of the board of the corporation, are free to do whatever they want with the city. They went to Honduras and they carved out a chunk of Honduras and they turned it into a corporate mini state. And this is what they want to do. They want to convert our cities, they want to convert our states, they want to convert Gaza, they want Greenland, tomorrow it will be Canada, maybe my country. Well, my country has already been taken over by corporations anyway after 2015. It's totally consistent with their own very specifically and clearly stated political philosophy. So, as I said, I'm only surprised that people are surprised. And you did allude to the fact that this is not unprecedented. Now, if you look at the history of colonialism, it does not begin with states. It begins with corporations. It was the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company that conquered Asia. And similar corporations conquered Africa. People say, and you mentioned that, oh my God, he's asking people to chip in $1 billion in order to be, legitimate members of the board of peace. Well, isn't that how the East India Company was created? Businessmen got together in a kind of thatched, roofed building in London at some point in 1599, if my memory serves me right, and they all chipped in. They became shareholders, and not only shareholders, but the shares were tradable as well. And off they went, and they took over India, and then they took over Indonesia, and then they took over parts of Southeast Asia. At some point, the East India Company had 200,000 soldiers under its command. It was only later that this was nationalized, when it was facing financial difficulties. It was a state bailout or a crown bailout, and that's how the British Empire, begun. So this is what he wants. That's what Peter Thiel, that Katz, that's the various thinkers and technocrats and tech lords around him. That's how they imagine the world. Now, that is not surprising at all. I'll tell you what is surprising. Maybe not that surprising, but more surprising. It is that the rest of the world went along with it. The British went along with it. The French went along with it. Every single Arab country went along with it. Turkey, that supported Hamas to a very large extent, went along with it. Qatar, which had Hamas leaders on its soil, went along with that. You had, countries like Egypt and Algeria waxing lyrical about Donald Trump, calling him a man of peace, right? And of course, you had the Europeans who thought, well, why do we care? As I said before, this is about Palestinians. It's not about Palestinians. It's about you folks as well. So it's the only silver lining I see in this disaster for the world and for humanity is that the centrists who, just like, think about it, a bit like the Weimar Republic. Hindenburg handed over the chancellorship of Germany to Hitler, thinking he can control him. And look what happened to those liberals who were more afraid of the left than they were of the Nazis. In the end, they ended up in the same prison camp as them. So it's only a tiny little silver lining. The catastrophe is still with us.